Round 2 of the Tile Memorial proved to be a very exciting day of chess again, but there was no problem for me to select my play of the day. I've gone with Vladimir Kramnik against Alexander Grischuk. Let's plunge straight in. It was a mainline King's Indian. Kramnik has the white pieces, and he selected the so-called bayonet variation. It's quite aggressive, it's very straightforward. White, of course, wants to open lines on the queen side with c5. Black gets counterplay on the king side with knight h5. So the knight would like to come in to f4. This is actually a very old variation, but Kramnik revived this in the 90s with the move rook e1. No doubt Grischuk would have been ready for that. But today, instead of that, Kramnik selected the old move g3. Of course, preventing the knight from coming in to f4. Grischuk played f5, the approved move, getting counterplay. And now, this is the idea of the bayonet variation. One of the ideas is that the knight is still on f3, and that allows you to play knight g5, looking at this weakened e6 square. Of course, the bishop threatens the knight, so the knight must come back. So now there's pressure on e4. And the old move here was f3 to bolster the e4 pawn, and well, this was actually very popular in the 1950s and 1960s. I've played this a couple of times, and okay, it's a very sharp, very interesting variation. The problem is that sometimes White's king is a little bit insecure. Sometimes there's counterplay for Black. For example, after f4, when you take here, g3 can be vulnerable, and this diagonal is open. That's the drawback of playing f3. So Kramnik's choice here was very interesting and actually very typical of his style. He played bishop f3 to support the pawn on e4. So that way you can see he maintains a rock solid pawn structure around his king, no open diagonals. Now he'd actually played this last year against Anish Giri, and on that occasion he'd played bishop a3. Now no doubt Grischuk would have been ready for this and had an improvement, but instead of that Kramnik simply played the bishop back to g2, a very tidy move indeed. Now this isn't just a waste of time or a waiting move. One of the ideas is that if Black were to push the pawn, then, well, White doesn't have to play in immediately, but just for demonstration, let me show this. The point is that with the bishop here, it can safely come out to h3 to support that pawn on e6, and if White can maintain that pawn, then of course that's very powerful indeed. So that's one of the points of playing the bishop back to g2. It's simply a very tidy move as well. h6 came from Grischuk, and of course the knight plunged in. This is very typical for this variation. Now it looks as though this pawn is completely doomed. You know, it's away from the rest of the white pieces, but it's not so easy for Black to attack that pawn. For example, you can't play queen c8 because the d6 pawn falls. So that, well, we're going to see the reason that Black played c6 now. Grischuk took on e4, and now if bishop e4, then the pawn advances to d5 and kicks White backwards. So instead of that, Kramnik played b5, an excellent move. Now the point of this, okay, sometimes there's a bit of pressure on c6 and sometimes it's nice to open the line here, but actually the real point is to enable the bishop to come to a3 to press on this diagonal. So it's not so simple for Black to push with d5. Okay, let's take a look and see how this works out in practice. Okay, Black goes for the pawn. So you can see that White is now a pawn down. What does he have for it? Well, two fantastic bishops. I think not even Vishy Anand would go for this position with Black, with the knight and bishop against two bishops, because those white bishops are so powerful. Okay, queen a4. Also, the rook is very awkwardly placed on the 6th rank here. And you can see that black's king is rather exposed. And also, in playing h6, the g6 point is rather weak as well, as we'll see a little bit later. Okay, so there's pressure on c6, d5, and rook d1. Somehow white's moves are very, very easy here. You can see he's really well coordinated. The rook opposite the queen, pressure on d5, and there's going to be pressure on this diagonal soon, so that's why black played king to h7. And Kramnik exchanged, and now there's pressure here on d5, and there are really nasty pins in this position. If, for example, rook d6, now we can see the point of playing the pawn to b5, then that just slices through black's pieces, very unpleasant. Okay, Grischuk tried rook b6, and now a4. Well, this is an excellent move, maintaining the pressure. If I just go back, of course it's possible to take on d5, but this would give black his chance. Then you could come back and play rook d6, and after the bishop moves back, let's say here, well, you can see that white is just going backwards for a moment, and the knight lands on this beautiful square on d4, for example. So a4 was much stronger, maintaining the pressure and just keeping black guessing when this pawn's going to be captured. Okay, a6, so Grischuk is trying to get counterplay. A takes b5, and now Kramnik takes the knight off and takes on d5. So he's kept the light squared bishop, and it's this bishop which is really white's best piece. This slices across to the queen side, it cuts through to black's king. It's so nasty, and on e4 of course it blockades the e5 pawn, preventing the bishop from releasing its full potential across the board. Positionally this is wonderful for white, and tactically things go white's way as well. Let's take a look. So white is still a pawn down. Grischuk tries to hang on to this with b4, but after a5 things are very, very nasty indeed. Queen f7 was played. Now there are some funny pins here of course, but well, it's interesting to see how Kramnik dealt with this. His next move was superb, and actually this is one of my favourite attacking moves. I love attacking with the h-pawn because it doesn't harm white's king position, but moving the pawn to h5 is very effective indeed to just winkle open black's king. h5 was played, which looks logical, but would you believe it, after queen d1 Grischuk resigned the game. h4 was very tricky. Now black might have been lost anyway, but first of all let's talk through exactly why black resigned. Well, now you can see that the queen defends the rook, so pawn takes rook is now a threat. There's also another threat, and that's queen takes pawn, exploiting this pin. So let's see, black saves the rook, and now queen takes h5 is possible, but actually maybe even better is to play rook d7, and after queen e6 then take the b pawn. There's still a threat of queen h5 check, still very nasty indeed, but now we've got an a pawn that's ready to zoom down the board, and we're also threatening rook takes bishop, followed by bishop takes rook. So all kinds of threats still on the board. Let's see. Well, let's suppose black defends with rook a6, then queen h5. Okay, we'll come back with queen e2. Black's king is horribly exposed. This bishop still rules the board. Okay, let's see. b3. Now bishop d3 hits the rook, threatens bishop c4. This is just horrendous. Okay, that's one typical variation. Let's go back and look at what might happen if black didn't play h5. Okay, let's look at the alternatives. Obviously, white has a potent threat in h5. So let's try king g8. Well, we're going to play h5 anyway. And after taking, now we switch to the attack completely. So we want to move down here. Obviously, pawn takes rook is threatened. So what happens on, well, let's say rook takes a5. Now there's a funny pin here. But after rook d8, rook d7, this wins. And now it's forced checkmate. You can see black's king is just getting cut to shreds here. Okay, what about rook d6? Now again, it's exploiting this pin here. But amazingly, after this move, white is winning. So the queen is now guarded, so we're threatening rook takes rook. And after rook takes, bishop takes rook. Again, black is killed on the light squares. It's quite extraordinary. There is really no good defense here. What about instead of king g8? Well, what about king h8? Well, that actually loses the queen. What else have we got? Let's try rook d6. Well, again, we'll play h5. We'll take, and well, I mean, this is absolutely horrendous. And the a pawn is a terrible threat. The king is ruined. White is just winning. So in this position, after this wonderful move, that's my move of the day, h4. I think black actually has a lost position. Beautiful game by Kramnik. You know, he had a reputation in the 90s as a King's Indian killer. He basically defeated Kasparov on a number of occasions, after which Kasparov gave up the King's Indian. And it looks like he's still doing the same today. See you later for more play of the day on the Tile Memorial Tournament. And don't forget, if you want to subscribe to my YouTube channel, you can do. Just click on the link and you'll get the videos as soon as possible.